Welcome. First off, thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day. I know everybody's busy like that. I will actually apologize up front for the screen share. I typically don't do these with a screen share or a PowerPoint like this. The camera up in my studio actually decided not to cooperate today. So that is one of those things with technology. You always got to have a plan B and a backup to go with it. So we'll go with the screen share today. But also kind of wanted to give a warning up front. This is typically at least about a half day's worth of material that I go through with a client in person, and I'm going to try to cram it into an hour. So this is going to be much closer to a sprint rather than a jog here on this. But with that said, I'll provide a link at the end for anybody and everybody, those here and not kind of thing, to download the recording, download all the materials. And then I always, whenever I do a workshop, there's a scheduling link up there to grab an hour of my time, where I always find with workshops and stuff that I go to, it's great information, and you kind of get afterwards and say, how do I apply this to my business? So I always like putting that schedule up there to say, hey, I'll be happy to sit down with you for an hour afterwards, answer any questions, and say, hey, let's tailor this to what you got going on, your specific business scenario. So with all that said, we will dive right on in here. Quick little check just to make sure before we start climbing here, kind of a thing. I know we had a little bit of conversation up front, so I'm pretty sure you can hear me, but any issues with seeing slides or seeing me? Everybody okay right now?
That was great. Good to go.
All right. Technology's at least cooperating on this side, so we're good. So first off, just want to ask kind of a quick question here, and this is somewhat rhetorical kind of a thing here, but looking at your business, which one of these is typically the biggest challenge you're facing, whether it's control, whether it's profit, whether it's people, overall kind of hitting a ceiling, or just simply the idea that nothing works? And think about this for a second. I'll come back to these, the results, come back to your thoughts here in just a minute here. But these are typically some of the things that I run into with business leaders working with them here. And I'll show you kind of how all this ties back here, like I said, in just a second. So let me start off here really with asking you a question. So when you look at all of the people involved in your business, so this is employees, this is business partners, this is outside partners, relationships, this is vendors that you work with, even your customers, kind of a thing here. If you were really to start over with your business today, would you hire or do business with each one of these people again? And again, not looking for an answer jump out right here, but the reality with this is that probably some people, you've got some people that you love working with, other people that you're maybe more on the fence about. And if you're really candid with yourself, there's probably a few you might prefer not to have in your circle here if you were to start over again. With Dan Sullivan's strategic coach program, he defines out 4 entrepreneurial freedoms. And basically, this is why most of us went into business in the first place instead of joining corporate America, or maybe it's why we left corporate America, kind of a thing. And he lists those as time being basically control over your own time, having the freedom to devote it to whatever you choose. Money or financial side, saying effectively, you're in your own business. There's no upper limit or restrictions to how much money you can make potentially. Relationships, in that you get to work with the people that you want to work with. Again, going back to clients, team members, vendors, et cetera. And then a purpose to say that really the company you create is a vehicle for living your life the way you want to and achieving the things that are most important to you. Now, the key here with all 4 of these, obviously, is that you have to have a business in order to go realize these freedoms. And the challenge, to me, it's almost a detriment that the barrier to entry to starting a business today is so low, so easy. It's a drive down to the county office, the city office, fill out a quick DBA form, and technically you're in business at that point. So the actual idea of starting a business is pretty easy at this point. The challenge that I see most people facing is, okay, how do we grow that business? How do we scale that business? Because reality is, at some point, you're going to hit a point where the resources and expertise that you need to move that business forward are simply more than you alone can provide. And to grow the company really beyond that point, you need other people. You need other talents, other strengths that are either different or complementary to your own, but you simply need people to grow that business. And that turns into in large case, a double-edged sword, that it's a challenge to sit there and find, again, the right people, bring the right ones on board. So going back to that kind of intro poll, that intro question there, again, when I work with business leaders, there's typically some variation of these 5 challenges that they voice. That, like I said, on the control side, effectively it's saying, hey, my business has got more control over me than I have over the business, that it's simply just not fun anymore. It's not what I got into business to do, that this is work. On the profit side, it's simply saying that there's not enough profit to make it worth the time and energy that I'm investing in the business. There's not enough profit to reinvest back into the business, or honestly, to pay out what I'd like to get paid out. People side's pretty straightforward. I'm just simply not getting enough out of my people. We're not on the same page. We're not working together to win same direction. The hitting the ceiling side is simply saying, hey, basically everything we're accomplishing today, we're doing by brute force, that we work extremely hard, yet really we can't seem to move the needle on that. And nothing's working. This is the visionary challenge more often than not, the shiny object kind of a thing, that I've tried this book, I've tried this seminar, this webinar, whatever kind of a thing. I've tried all these different solutions. None of them tend to make any lasting difference in the company. And the interesting thing that I find with each one of these is that at the root level, there's a component of the people side in each one of these, that you find maybe you don't have the people necessary to delegate and take things off of your plate. Maybe despite having the strategic plan in place, that you don't have the people executing on that plan, simply making basically the plan a dream at that point. Or maybe it's a case that despite having the full team, you don't necessarily have the right skills, the right expertise, or simply the right focus with your team to be able to move the business forward. So all of this, like I said, a lot of times comes back to having people, which is kind of one of the reasons we're talking about what we're looking at today. Looking at one of the industry giants, industry greats out there, Jim Collins, in his book, Good to Great. So I'm assuming probably everybody's familiar with that one, seen that one before. He found something interesting in saying that we expected that good to great leaders would begin by setting out a new vision, a new strategy for the company to take the company to the next level. However, instead, they found that basically those leaders first focused on getting the right people on the team, the wrong people off the team, and really getting the right people into the right seats. So if you think about this a different way, look at your favorite sports team kind of a thing there. And we've had plenty of turnover here in the Dallas area. But if they were to go out and hire a new head coach, one of the first things that head coach would do is take a look at the current roster. They would say, hey, what players do we have on the team? What skill sets do we have? Where have we got holes? Things like that. They wouldn't necessarily start off designing plays because simply they don't know if they've got the players to actually run those plays. So you can have a great playbook, you can have great systems. If you don't have the people there to actually execute on them, it's just a dream at that point. And we've experienced some of that with Dallas teams here recently. So looking at the keys really to scaling, building out that business, it goes back to those 4 entrepreneurial kind of freedoms. The idea is to have the business not be working for somebody else, but the challenge comes in with scaling it. And the keys to scaling the business really is, again, having the right people sitting in the right seats, doing the right things at the right time and in the right way. So if you kind of think about those, okay, we've got to have the right team, but again, it doesn't help if we've got the right team doing the wrong things or not working together, not things like that. So we've got to make sure that, okay, right people sitting in right seats, doing the right things. So this comes back to our playbook, making sure that we're always executing the right way at the right time. So again, making sure processes are followed through, everything's delivered in our way, our culture, our mission there from a company standpoint to really take our company forward. So these 5 things kind of encompass most all of the program that I look at with clients. So we're only going to touch on a couple of these today. Just like I said, we'll run through this in an hour's time. Speaking of the program, so when I work with companies, I have what I refer to as really the pinnacle principle. And the goal here, end goal of the overall, is to say, okay, how do we help your business reach its pinnacle, the top point, the top peak of that mountain, whether that's your I guess Jim Collins refers to it as a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. What's that goal? What's that long-term objective of your company? And that's the goal. That's the long-term thing that we're looking to reach. To get to that goal, to get to the profits, et cetera, that you're looking for, you need the right people working with a shared purpose in a high-performing manner with a proven playbook. So again, it's kind of the 4 Ps here tied to profit there, but it always goes back to people. That if we don't have the right people on the team doing the right things, we're never going to be able to realize that goal. So enough of all that. Let's get into a little bit of tactical here, a little bit of nitty gritty. So looking at 3 different tools here today that I wanted to walk through with you, bring through here. Basically, again, this is looking at really the right people, right seats aspect here of the company here. But first off is the talent assessment. So this one is simply looking at a tool to help you gain clarity, understand who the right players are, who the A players, your A potential players are on your team, because honestly, we'd prefer to have a whole team of A players if possible. Second, we're going to take a look at the functional accountability chart. So the key with both functional and process accountability is simply having, 1, the accountability side, but 2, the clarity side, to say, okay, as the owner, as the leader of the business, do you really understand what's going on? Do you understand that things are being accomplished the right way, that who's the accountable, who's reporting back to you, and has that clarity? Because that really, to me, anytime you've got a leader that ends up micromanaging, ends up getting down in the weeds too much on the business, it's largely because they don't have the clarity. They can't see what's going on in the business to really know that, okay, I don't have to get down in there and get down in the trenches, because I can see that this team, this process, this function, whatever the case may be, is giving me back the results that I want. So both of these tools, both functional accountability and process accountability, look at the business from 2 different directions. But again, it just helps drive that sense of accountability, that sense of clarity. First off here, looking at that talent assessment. So the talent assessment is based off of a system called Top Grading by Brad Smart. So if you haven't heard of Top Grading, basically this is really a whole system looking at hiring, coaching, and really keeping your A players. So it starts in at the hiring process, goes all the way through evaluating current team, things like that. We're going to look at more of the current team evaluation in today with the talent assessment. But in Brad's words from the book, it says, great companies, large and small, rise or fall because of their talent. That the more high performers on your team, the more successful your organization will be. And obviously, of course, that's easier said than done. That research shows that only about 25% of all new hires turn out to be high performers. So the question they're out to address, and the question we pull in with a number of the tools that I work with, is, okay, how do we identify that 25%? How do we identify who's going to be the A players on the team? Make sure that, 1, we keep the ones that we've got. We don't want to lose them to somebody else. We get rid of the ones that are not A players that we can't groom up to be A players. And in our hiring process, how do we identify who those A players are ahead of time to be able to bring them on board? So looking at the current employee base. So this, again, is just kind of giving you clarity, because a lot of times people look at their team and say, yeah, I've got a good team. What does that really mean there? That you don't really have true data to say, okay, how do we work with each one of you? What does each one of you need in order to take you to the next level? And that's really where this talent assessment comes in. So talent assessment is a 2-page tool here. And on this chart side of it here, we start out really listing each one of the team players. So this goes from top to bottom of the organization, from CEO all the way down to janitor sweeping the floors, whatever kind of a thing there. This is every single person in the company that we'll sit here and work with. And to that degree, obviously, larger companies can have more challenges here with this, but it still comes down to working with everybody in the company needs to be sitting here and looking at it. So we'll go through, list again, all the team members there in that first column. The cultural fit column. Culture can mean different things to different companies. So this is really subjective somewhat within your organization, within your company. And the idea is that we're looking to score everybody from a 0 to 10 range here with regards to basically how well do they exhibit your culture on a day in and day out basis. So another way to look at this is to say, okay, how well do they play with others on the team? So is this somebody that is exhibiting your culture, exhibiting your values, everybody enjoys being around them, things like that, and rating on a 0 to 10 scale. The third column here is looking at the productivity side. So this a lot of times is where we really gauge people, for that matter, where we hire people from a skill set perspective like that, to say, okay, from 0 to 10, how consistently are they doing great work? So again, just looking at productivity on that side. And for now, at least initially, we ignore the rating and the coaching plan columns here. But the thing, again, going back to the original comment kind of a thing, a lot of people tend to just look at their team as a whole. And I tend to see on a first pass of this, a lot of people with pretty high scores kind of a thing there. And the thing you need to realize with looking at this is that a 5 on both scales, again, we're going 0 to 10. So a 5 on both sides, cultural fit as well as productivity fit, is an average score. So there's nothing really wrong with that. The question I typically have to ask is, okay, so putting everybody down here, looking specifically at each one person, do you really have the best of the best working across the board? Because again, a lot of times I'll see very high scores across the board. It's like, okay, again, going back to that very original question, if you were to start all over, would you work with every single person again? And really the top A players are the ones that you'd want to work with. So would you really hire everybody there and be realistic with that scoring? And another way I'll look at it here, just to kind of help set that bar, is to say, okay, look back now, somebody you had to let go of last month, last year, whatever the case may be. In all likelihood, the fact that you had to let them go, there was an issue with one or both of these scores. So put them on this chart, score them both cultural and productivity right there, kind of helps set a bar, set a baseline right there for that, to say, okay, I know we had to let that person go just because he never met his numbers or because he was always complaining and griping, whatever thing like that. Put them on there and use that as a gauge effectively for the other members of your team. Then once we put everybody on that chart, we'll flip this over and look at the second page of the talent assessment. And what we go about here is really plotting everybody on from that first page with those two scores, plot them onto this graph where the cultural fit is the vertical axis right there. So that's the up and down. Productivity fit is left and right there. So I'll take you through an example here just in a minute. But what I want to take a look at here is these different ratings, the different areas on that graph. So a 9.9 or better really is your true A players. These are the people that are honestly absolutely doing great. We don't want to upset anything that they're doing. We don't want to touch. It's like, hey, these are these are all but perfect right here, kind of a thing there. Let them keep excelling. As we said before, a 5.5 or better really right here is your A potential players. And the ideal with an A potential is that with a little bit more coaching, with a little bit more help, some more training, whatever the case may be, they've got the potential to move up into that upper quadrant, turning them into A players. So this is the ones we really want to be working with. We want to be coaching right there. Now, looking again at the graph here, the upper left corner up there, that's your B players. So again, great cultural fit, maybe not quite as great on the productivity side. These tend to be the people that are honestly the most fun to be around, kind of a thing. Like I said, they're a great person to go stand at the water cooler and talk to. They're just simply not real productive. And that turns into a question there of, okay, we're running a for-profit business. They're great players, but are they contributing to our bottom line here? So some question there is, okay, can we help them? Can we move them along or not? But still, that's where we'd qualify our B players. Going to the opposite corner down there, the bottom right side, these are your BC players. So again, looking at the opposite side, they're productive. They're highly productive in many cases. They just don't quite fit the culture. So I always joke with people, if you had a night shift in your business, this is probably where you would go put those players. So this is the only person on your team that happens to know the inner workings of the database model or whatever there. You don't want to sit there and go try to have a conversation with them, but at the same time, they're the only ones that know how this thing works. So you've got to have them around, kind of a thing there. So that's typically where those players fit down there, is into that BC category. And then the last one that's absolutely critical really to identify is that bottom left corner, the C players. So honestly, point blank, they simply have to go at that point. The problem that a lot of people don't see is that your A players, your A potential players are sitting there looking at how you tolerate and how you work with your C players. And they're sitting there saying, wait a minute, why am I carrying the load for those C players when they're not productive? They're always complaining. They're always griping. Why am I there with them? And the downside you'll see is, wait a minute, John, our A player, just went to lunch with Sarah, our C player. And now John comes back and he's no longer an A player, that he's pulling your C players are pulling your A's, pulling your B's down at that point with them. So the adage here is the saying always is that people join companies, they quit their boss. So your A players, your A potential that you don't want to lose, they're watching how you deal with the C players and the fact that, okay, if you're tolerating those C players, they're saying, this is not a place I want to work with. They're quitting because of the people side at that point of how you're dealing with those people rather than building up the culture. If they can constantly see you working with the B's, the A potentials to coach that, and we're culling out the C's, you got a much better environment there from a team player environment. So let's turn this into a little bit more practical example. So we've got Acme widgets here. So I don't know, whatever reason, we always go back to widgets, even though nobody knows what a widget is. But we've got 13 something players here, if I can count. Looking at this, we've got a lot of big titles for a small company. So we obviously like our titles here, but still fairly standardized structure. We've got marketing, we've got sales, we've got operations development, we've got the finance operation here. So one key note here, again, this goes back to listing out all of our people that I'm talking about that we're developing or working with. We've got over here under the finance option or operation, we've got Gary, who's our outsourced bookkeeper. So again, this is not necessarily people that are sitting in your office every day on a daily basis on your payroll. This can be an outsourced IT, an outsourced bookkeeper, fractional sales, whatever kind of a thing that we've got here. We want to make sure that, okay, if we're paying them to deliver value to our company, we need to make sure that they're still a fit, that obviously they're being productive, they're delivering what we need from a bookkeeping standpoint here. We want, obviously, Gary to make sure that the books are current, they're up to date, that he's giving us weekly reports, whatever our metrics are for him, that even though he's not directly in our company, again, he still should fit on this. He should be, ideally, it's like we'd want him to be following our cultural values, he'd be bought into our overall mission there, because if he's personally got a diametrically opposed mission kind of a thing there, again, probably just not the best fit. It may work, but there could well be somebody better there. So I want to take this list of employees here, plot them over here again onto our cultural fit. So if you'll notice, or if you'll remember, this goes all the way to the very top with Mark up here as the CEO. And Mark's great cultural fit. Personally, I have a hard time ever rating anybody as a 10. I always look at 10 as saying there's always some room to improve. So always ever have, tough time rating anybody at a 10, but great cultural fit. At the same time, Mark realizes, hey, I'm the visionary type. I'm the squirrel chaser kind of a thing. So I can get off in the weeds. I can get off talking with people, and I'm probably not the most productive all the time, but that's still perfectly fine. Shane here, again, I believe was our VP of marketing right here. Really quality fit kind of a thing here. Going through these, okay, well, we've got Michael. I believe he was on the sales side. Not the best cultural fit, extremely productive. So a lot of times we'll see this, especially with the sales, that they're out to get whatever deal they can get kind of a thing. Highly productive, highly driving our bottom line. May not necessarily be selling things great the way we want to him. He may be promising things that maybe we can't deliver, or maybe we have a hard time delivering kind of a thing there. So this can be a challenge right there. Going through here, I believe Peter was over on, I think he was on the development side, but again, just good player, good guy, but still not the best fit here for sure kind of a thing there. And then they'll go and got Laurel on the far side as well. Very good personality fit kind of a thing, not the best productivity fit there. So just going through those first two columns, again, putting down the team members, putting down their cultural fit score, their productivity score. Flip this one over. we'll go through and plot this. And this is really, to me, where you start getting that clarity, where you start getting that understanding that, okay, yeah, we really do have the core, at least, of a good team up here. At the same time, we've got 2 or 3 outliers over here on the B side. Again, not the most productive, but still a good cultural fit. They're not hurting us from a cultural standpoint. And we've got a C down here, a BC, and wow, we've got a C down here. Okay, so this is where, again, Peter filled in. So again, this is where somebody's dragging you down. This C right here is probably having some impact right here on Laurel. I bet you Laurel's right here over on the B side. Again, this productivity of 2. Peter and Laurel were sitting on the same team in our operations, our development side. So they're sitting here talking. Laurel's sitting here hearing Peter gripe, hearing Peter not doing things. Peter's probably pulling her down to a B at this point. She might well be an A if she had a higher performer next to her, if she had somebody else driving her, kind of a thing there. So this is really where we start seeing that issue and saying, hey, that C has got to get off the team. We've got to figure out a way to replace them, a way to backfill, things like that, that this one is probably pulling down the people around them. And even, I believe, I don't have that org chart in memory here. We've got even Natasha, which I believe is the overall manager here, again, being pulled down a little bit on productivity side, probably because she's having to deal with Peter here in terms of trying to get him on task. She's looking at her overall productivity as being the leader of that department and saying, yeah, my team's dragging me down, honestly. And that's definitely something that can happen and does happen often. So this is really where that clarity starts to pop out. And then going back here real quick, we can take those ratings that we pulled off of that chart, put them into this third column over here, rating A, B, and C, and then we start building out this action plan, this coaching plan for them. Because honestly, like I said, the ones that are in that A potential group over here, the ones we had with Mark potentially, but still Jamie, Amber, Natasha, et cetera here, A potential is basically saying, hey, we just need a little bit more help. We need an action plan to say, okay, from a cultural fit, Natasha here, here's where, actually, Natasha is really high on the cultural side, but still pick one of these that's potentially a little bit lower on cultural kind of a thing there and say, hey, we've got 5 core values here. You're lining up with 3 out of 5 on a very consistent basis. What we'd like to see here working with you is over here on number 4, number 5, we'd like to see you be more outgoing with the customers. We'd like to see you always trying to put them first, whatever the case may be with our cultural values, but it gives you more of a true action plan to sit down there with them and say, okay, this is where you're succeeding. This is where we'd like to see a little bit more work, just to help move them up from that A potential to that full A player level at that point. And then, like I said, again, it helps spot these ones that are the C getting closer. Okay, if you've got somebody right on the line between a BC or a B, BC either way right here, those are the ones that you've really got to take a hard look at and say, okay, what do we need to do to make a change here? Is this something that can they be brought up? Can we build an action plan here to say, hey, Peter, you got a 90-day plan here. We've either got to move the needle up here or we're going to have to replace you, kind of a thing there. I'm never one for just blind firing at that point. There ought to be some understanding, some expectation as to, okay, why are we struggling here? Why are we running into a challenge here? Let's see if we can address this. But still, this one is a high point of interest. We've got to address this and figure out what's going on here, like I said, because he's potentially most likely impacting other players on the team. So again, just giving you that clarity. Then I want to moving on from that talent assessment here. Most everybody, I'm assuming, has probably seen the concept of an org chart here. And really, most companies try to build out the org chart just because history honestly tells us that we should have one. And reality is, in most small companies especially, that the org chart is out of date before it even gets printed, kind of a thing. So the question here is, while there's potentially some value to this org chart, what does this really tell us? That, yeah, looking at it, it kind of tells us the chain of command that we're looking at here. But if I were to look at this org chart for our fictional company here, for your company here, would it tell me who's accountable for customer onboarding or who's accountable for payroll? That kind of information is typically lacking in the understanding, and it's lacking in your team at that point. So if they don't have the clarity, then you're not going to have the clarity as the leadership either. So taking this org chart, we look at this from a different way with our accountability side. And before I jump into those two tools, the process and the functional accountability chart, I want to outline a couple of definitions, a couple of terminology here, because many times when people hear the word accountable, they really get the wrong image in mind. So looking at this is just from a financial standpoint. The CEO of the company has the authority to sign off on all major deals. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he's accountable for the deals or for the finances. The CFO, in this case, has the accountability for cash in the business. And literally, when we're looking at accountability, it means they count and they report on the cash and finances on a regular basis. So the CEO is looking to the CFO to say, hey, give me a number every week, every whatever, to say, okay, where's our metrics? Where's our cash on hand balance? Where's our accounts receivable balance? And the CFO's responsibility literally is to count the cash, count the bank balances, et cetera, and report back up. The CFO is not necessarily the one that has the authority to sign off on major purchases or is really responsible for the managing of cash. And that's where we go to the last one to say, really, the entire team has the responsibility to ensure that cash is being wisely spent overall with their budgets, with their expenditures, things like that. So once we start looking at functions and processes, this really comes back to play that, okay, just because somebody's accountable for marketing or accountable for a customer onboarding journey kind of a thing doesn't mean they're necessarily the boss over all those people, doesn't necessarily mean that they're in charge of getting all the people to work on time, et cetera, kind of a thing. What they're simply accountable for is that process working right? Is everything, do we have a pulse on the work? And basically reporting back to whomever they need to say, hey, there's a red flag here. Something's off track. Something's not working. Our time to delivery number is going off track. We need to investigate and figure out what's going on. Doesn't necessarily mean they're in charge of everything for customer onboarding. They're the ones saying, hey, wait a minute, overall time frame for customer onboarding is going above our thresholds. We're getting more complaints, whatever, and lifting that up as an issue so that other people around that do have more direct control over specific aspects of that process can look at it and say, okay, where's the problem? Where's the bottleneck here that we need to address? So just want to clarify there exactly what we're talking about with accountability. So really the ability of a business to scale comes down to one simple thing, really. And I've hear guests when I'm talking on my podcast kind of a thing all the time with business leaders, always ask them, hey, what's the one key to your growth? What's the one key, the one struggle kind of a thing that you've been dealing with? It every single time, almost without fail, comes back to delegation. That as the entrepreneur initially when starting a business, yeah, we're wearing all of the hats just by necessity at that point. But really the key to being able to grow the business is that we should always be asking this question: who can I delegate this task, this hat to, that can do this task as good or even better, hopefully better than I can, so that I can be freed up as the leader to go focus where I need to. And the longer that we hold on to all of these tasks, all these hats, all of these functions here in the business, honestly, the longer you strangle the business, because you turn into the bottleneck for your own business at that point. Doesn't allow the business to move forward, because reality is, while we probably can do just about everything in your business, there is probably somebody out there that can do an aspect of it much better than you can. And it goes back to the saying of basically, you shouldn't ever be in the room where you're the smartest person in the room. We're always wanting to bring in talent, bring in outside expertise that they're not necessarily they're not going to replace us by any means, because they're not the big picture. But they can do accounting, or they can do product development, or they can do sales much better than we can individually, either from a time perspective or from an ability perspective, either one. So second tool of the day here, looking at the functional accountability chart. So functions, when we're looking at a business, is going vertical. So think back to the org chart of doing sales, marketing, operations, finance here, kind of a thing. What we want to start off with this one, again, looking at just trying to bring clarity to everybody involved here. That first column, we want to simply identify what are the major functions in the business. So again, sales, marketing, operations, finance, everybody's a little bit different kind of a thing there. The second column is where we want to list that person that's accountable for each one of those functions. The third column here, we want to look at key performance indicators, but specifically look at leading indicators that would give you a heads up really if something was on track, or something was off track. So for example, for sales, our leading indicator, our KPI there might be that we want to always have 250 opportunities in our pipeline kind of a thing. So if we start seeing that number dip below 250, then hey, that starts setting off a red flag to say, okay, we've got an issue here, not necessarily today, but next month, next quarter, whatever, our pipeline's drying up kind of a thing there. We need to address this. So we want to have the leading indicators, not the lagging side, because if it's lagging, then by that point, it's quite possibly too late to address. So we're already off the rails at that point. Lastly, that fourth column here, we want to take and connect each one of these business units, business functions, directly to a line item on your P&L or on your balance sheet at that point. And again, this gives us direct tie back into the financial side because honestly, everything on the business runs on cash. If you run out of cash, you don't have a business there. So we've got to have everybody tied into either a profit or a loss kind of a thing. Sales would be income side versus operations may be an expense side right there. So tying each one of those directly to a P&L line item or a balance sheet item. And then once we go through this list down there at the bottom, there's really potentially 4 different issues we want to look at here. From the accountability side, accountability has to roll up to one person. A lot of times, I think it was the Michael Dell story when he came back into Dell, and basically there was nobody in charge of marketing. There was no chief marketing officer. It was kind of the idea of, hey, everybody's doing marketing. It's like, well, when everybody does something, honestly, nobody does anything at that point. So accountability, we got to have one name in each one of those boxes. That has to be the single person in that box. On the flip side, though, we need to look at it because honestly, in the early days, your name's going to be right down that person accountable for every single one of those functions. And we want to keep an eye on that because if you've got one person's name in a lot more functions there than other people, you've got a constraint, you've got a bottleneck there with that person to say, hey, if that person's no longer in the picture, we got a problem here kind of a thing there. And then also looking at saying, okay, where have we got empty boxes? Where have we got a function there that has nobody accountable for it, that has no leading indicators defined, et cetera, because we don't have the clarity at that point to this. And then lastly, the fourth one here is saying, okay, simply, do we have the right people? Yes, we've got a person in this box. Are they the right person for that box? And it's really boils down to a 3-question test to say, if the person in that box is the right fit, really, they should not need managing. They should be able to handle this on their own. They should be accountable to it. They should be able to bring that up there, bring the numbers, bring the issues on their own. They shouldn't need somebody managing them. Going back to our talent assessment, they should obviously be a cultural fit. They should be on the same page with our mission. They should be somebody that we enjoy working with, somebody that's driving this forward, because if they're opposed or even off track with our mission, that's got the potential there of impacting their accounting of that function right there. And then the last one really is that, honestly, they should regularly wow you. This should be somebody that is always coming back and saying, hey, yeah, I know we're on track with A, B, and C, but we might ought to look at this other idea or this other metric or something over here that's showing something a little bit different. They're bringing more to the table potentially than is necessarily asked. So they're constantly challenging, constantly helping move forward. So taking this back into our fictional Acme Widgets company here, just to throw a few things up here. Again, this is just examples. This is not necessarily a line item for every company here. And honestly, there's more functions here than we just put up here on this slide. But still, it's looking at, for example, head of company is a function in the business. So Mark, the CEO, is head of company. His KPI, his performance indicators is running the leadership meeting every week, every month, whatever that way. And from a results outcome, honestly, we all know everything rolls up to the head at that point. So his really is a global outcome versus, for example, looking at marketing here with Shane, we've defined that a key performance indicator, one of our big things for Acme Widgets as we go out and do conferences, do shows, et cetera, that we weren't able to do this last year, but still his key indicator here is that we're holding at least 4 events every month, kind of a thing with the team. And from a results standpoint over here is that we're looking at new lead acquisition here on his side. So this one is looking at least 30 new leads every month to say, okay, are we tied to that? This one is a little bit different. Like I said, from a P&L balance sheet statement, most of these other ones tie into gross margin, new sales. Again, operations, we're looking at project turnaround time. So this one's a little bit different, not necessarily direct financial, but then finance is looking at least $2 million liquid assets in the bank, kind of a thing there. So each one of these, we can look at this and say, okay, Tim, from a finance standpoint, is our cash conversion cycle less than 30 days? So he can actually sit there and track that cash conversion cycle as we go along and say, wait a minute, we're up to 35, we're up to 40 days now. We got a problem on collections. We got a problem on delivering here. And we can identify exactly where that is. And hopefully from Mark's standpoint, or even from the leadership team as a whole standpoint, they can look at these KPIs here. I don't have to know marketing perspective, what events, if I'm the CEO, I don't necessarily need to know, hey, we're out at these 4 conferences. I don't care which 4 conferences are. I'm looking at it saying, okay, we've got 4 events on the calendar this month. And I can see trends over the last 90 days, 6 months, whatever the case may be, to say, okay, are we still on track with 4 every month? We had a few that were 5 or 6. Great. We're growing and doing better. Oh, wait a minute. Now we're at 3. We're at 3. We're out of 2. What's going on here? And it gives us that leading indicator here to say, hey, if we're not doing enough events, that's going to come down here and directly impact our sales opportunities. That's going to come down here and directly impact how many, what our new sales and what our assets and things like that are. So it gives us that leading indicator, again, just clarity standpoint, that I should be able to look at these KPIs from a business owner, business leadership standpoint, and understand really whether the business is on track or off track. Taking the next step, so the functional accountability chart, like I said, we were looking vertically at the business. With every business, though, we've got certain processes that are key to really running the business, but these look at it more horizontally. So processes, for example, like a service delivery process or a customer onboarding process, they span multiple departments within the organization. So a customer onboarding potentially starts with sales, goes into operations at that point. Service delivery would go all the way out into finance to make sure we're actually collecting, things like that. So from this chart, we've got very similar layout to what we did before. We go through and identify all the major processes. So again, recruiting and hiring, client acquisition, invoicing, client quoting, anything like that can potentially span widthwise that's not necessarily tied to a specific department. So these are the major processes, again, that we have to run the business successfully right there. Second column, again, making sure that we've got somebody accountable for each one of these processes. And again, this goes back to one single person accountable. So even though the process may span sales and operations, there's only one person accountable. Obviously, that person has to live on one side or the other or somewhere in the organization. So again, they're not directing the resources in sales or operations. What they're simply doing is tracking those metrics, accounting for the numbers to say, okay, what is our current client onboarding process right now in terms of how many days is it taking to get a client on board? And they can go back and report up to the leadership team at that point to say, wait a minute, we were supposed to have a 15-day client onboarding, and now it's taking us 25. And the leadership team then can address and look at, okay, is the problem in sales? Is the problem in operations? Is the problem with the process? What's going on here? They can start digging into it at that point. It's not necessarily that person, the accountable person's job there to fix the issue. They're simply there to track the numbers and report on it. And then the last column there is still, again, key performance indicators, looking at leading indicators up there, again, to give you a heads up there if something was off track or on track. So same kind of issues we talked about with the other functional accountability chart. If you've got, make sure one person's in the box, not 2 or 3 people. Make sure that you've got these fairly evenly spread, that you don't have one constraint, one bottleneck anywhere in the organization. Make sure that you do have somebody assigned here. And then again, make sure you've got the right person assigned. So taking this back into our little Acme widget company here. So again, processes, client acquisition. So we want to make sure we've got at least a 90-day funnel out there for new client onboarding. person in charge of this is Jennifer. Obviously, client acquisition ties into both marketing of generating the new leads, as well as sales, picking those up, having the actual discovery, the actual sales calls, et cetera, to turn them into actual clients at that point. So it's our entire sales and marketing funnel right there. We want to have at least, on average, a 90-day funnel working there. Jennifer was head of sales looking at this, but obviously, like I said, ties over into the marketing side. Something like invoicing at this point, obviously pretty tightly tied to financial side, but it requires client data coming from the operations side, from the sales side to say, okay, what did we actually sell them? What did we actually deliver? Were we able to deliver everything? Did we have something back ordered? What was the case? So this all ties into invoicing and looks at the 32 days to collect there. So we want to make sure that, again, that's just our AR balance right there. Make sure we're really looking at it. We can have something like employee experience. So this goes 100% across the company at this point. And so our KPI here is an 80 or a employee net promoter score. But this is a red flag right here. We've got a hole. Nobody's really watching this. Nobody's really in charge of this. Who's collecting the data? Who's making sure it gets collected on a quarterly basis, an annual basis, whatever? Who's actually reporting this data back up to the leadership team? This is a red flag. And it's not unusual kind of a thing that I'll run into a client with stuff like this, that they don't necessarily always think about processes like this. They look at true financial business processes, like I said, of a service delivery or client acquisition, but there's other processes, other things like this that honestly make a successful business. That if you don't have a good employee experience right here, if your net promoter score right here is down, it doesn't matter how many new clients you're getting or how many sales you're getting. If you don't have the people there, if you don't have those A players that can consistently deliver, if you're losing your A players, obviously a major impact on your business at that point going forward. So looking at all these again, client quoting, client experience there. So again, just documenting each one of those and really making sure that you've got somebody accountable for with that. So quick little recap on that fire hose right there. Again, the idea was going back to building and scaling a successful business from the people side. So having the right people, obviously one tool right there, that's where our talent assessment comes in place. And we've got others that look at that, other tools as well. But having those right people sitting in the right seats. So that's, again, going back to functional and process accountability, several other things there to make sure that, again, we've got all of the right structure, the right functions of our business built out, and we've got people assigned sitting in there and they know what their roles and responsibilities are. So that, again, goes a lot further than just process and functional accountability, but the idea with the functional and process accountability is really helping gain up that clarity for us as the leadership team. And then, like I said, doing things right, having those people doing the right things all the time, at the right time, in the right way. So this is where we'll get into a lot of stuff around process development, around playbooks, around things like that, really making sure that everybody, great, you've got the right team. Now we've got to make sure they're executing correctly. So that's stuff that honestly we didn't have time to go through. That can be building out this entire process, building out this entire workflow with a company is a much longer journey than can ever get through on any given workshop here. But my obvious objective here as a coach and really where my passion is working with business leaders is to help you build your overall playbook to address all 5 of these things. So it's kind of goes back to the sporting team analogy. Hey, we've got to build the big picture playbook. Everybody knows exactly which plays I'm involved on. They know in that play exactly where I'm supposed to go run my route, what I'm supposed to go do here. And everybody's honestly is a team player built into that, because when you have the teams, I forget which team it was. It was Chicago or something on the basketball side. It was like I think it was Scottie Pippen was the name. And the coach, end of the game, we've got to have 3 more points to sit here and tie it, kind of a thing there. He said, okay, here's the play we're going to go run. Scottie Pippen's basically going out as a decoy, kind of a thing there. And Scottie Pippen piped up and said, no, I'm the best one on the team. I'm your A+ player. Get me the ball, whatever it takes, get me the ball, and I'm going to go score. And the coach says, no, this is the play we're going to go run. You're doing the decoy, you go that. And Scottie Pippen said, no. It's like, so the coach benched him at that point for the play. It's like, we've got to have everybody on board with the plays, everybody working together. It may not always be the superstar player taking the lead, kind of a thing there. There's a bigger picture at that point. So all that said, again, that's getting the right people there that Scottie Pippen in that case probably wasn't truly an A player. He great productivity, not necessarily the great cultural fit right there. So all goes back tying this together for the business side. And really each one of these tools, plus honestly, probably 50 plus more that I'm working with right now, really are just basic, simple concepts. It's like from what you saw today here, there's nothing rocket science here. This is pretty basic stuff, but it really helps to start seeing the clarity in the business. It helps seeing you can understand more of what's going on right there to really help run the business a little more efficiently, run the business better, help it move forward. So my question always kind of comes back to next steps here to say, okay, great, you've got material, great. What are you now going to do with it? How are you going to take that action to be able to ensure, like I said, with what we've talked about, the right people on the right seats? And the idea here with the picture is simply saying, okay, the view at the pinnacle of that mountain is incredible, but it takes quite a bit of work to get there. This is not something that, honestly, you go to a workshop, you go to a seminar, you can go to read a book, whatever, and fix this overnight. This takes work. And really the idea with these three tools is just to help you gain clarity in understanding what do I need to do? What changes do we need to be able to make in order to help move this forward? So with that said, actually, but just a couple minutes early. So I want to say thank you first off for taking time out of your schedule with that. Like I said, the link right here, if you copy that one, all three of the tools are available on that website, free to download right there. So you can grab all three of those, take a look at it. Also on that page is a feedback form. So always appreciate the feedback on the workshop. I know your time's valuable, and I'm always, my whole practice is built around returning value kind of a thing there, that I know people are not going to pay for something or invest their time either way in something that's not valuable. So I always want to get feedback there, make sure we're bringing value there. And then the third thing on that form, like I said, is a scheduling form. So grab an hour of my time right there. I will be happy to answer any questions specific to the business, walk you through specific scenarios, anything with these tools. And really with that said, that's kind of my dog and pony show for today. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you got for a couple more minutes here. Otherwise, I will give you back about 3 minutes of your day. So not too bad.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Curious, so some of what, you're talking about, the tools are great. And I've leveraged some of those, in my past corporate life, obviously. Are those kind of taken from other things that you've seen, prior to Admentus or other programs that you're part of? I'm just kind of curious where you've leveraged those, because I've had corporate versions of those in the past, not the exact same thing, but some same concepts. And so I will say they're great because I have a big corporate, background, and obviously now play strictly in the SMB space, same as you, right? So
yeah, no, they are all from other systems. And that's kind of really, honestly, my approach these days is not to teach one guru or one system. It's bringing in everybody. So the talent assessment, like I said, is top grading. That's Brad Smart. The other two, the functional accountability and process accountability, I think their origination was Vern Hardish and scaling up the Rockefeller habits there. I'm not sure if there was something before then or not, but I do know they came pretty solid, or they're definitely a key part of scaling up at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly there's a little traction in EOS, right people, right seats and stuff, which is great, right? So I've been in an EOS shop, and clearly a lot of really good best practices there. So no, you hit on some really good, in my opinion, best practices. So good stuff.
Appreciate it.